Well, hello. Yeah, I am a Swede, and I've been going around YouTube. I'm a bit late, but it takes me come few months over a year to understand that I got to do something. There's a lot of videos out there what Sweden will bring to NATO, and most of them are too positive. If I'm going to be completely honest with you, and I found one channel called the Warographics. What will Sweden bring to NATO? A Warographics Analysis. So I'm gonna make the analysis of this one. The last thing I heard on the news was that the war, or sorry, the armed forces in Sweden are begging for more money from the government, and so far, it's I think it's actually a positive response from the government. So, and we need a frick ton of more money in the armed forces. If we're gonna be a part of NATO, we gotta understand that if NATO calls, we will sending our young men and women to war infected lands, either to stand guard or go on the attack. And that's something Swedes don't understand. And let's see what Warographics analysis about this is, if it's true or it's just over bullcrap. I'm going to say bullcrap. So, and if you do enjoy this, don't forget to smack the like and, of course, hit that subscribe. That's something I would greatly appreciate. We say thank you so much to everyone who supports me on, YouTube and Patreon. Thank you so much for that. That's very kind of you. A big shout out to the Supreme Tier donators. Thank you. Very kind of you. Very generous. I appreciate it a lot. Ultimate supporters, they get their own personal shout out. And that's Deja, Walt, Dwayne, Dana, Troy, Robert, Matt, Lon, Barbara, and Kevin. Thank you. I love that list. Then again, let's find out how much bullcrap or how much over exaggerated this actually is. If you haven't checked out World Graphics yet, you can do that by looking in my description. There you go. You can find the link for the video and for the channel. I'm going to click subscribe right now. If you can do that too, I'm pretty sure that the owner of that channel would greatly appreciate that. Yeah, again, link for the channel and for this video pinned, or not pinned. It's in the freaking description. So we've got 23 minutes of him talking about Sweden and NATO. Let's find out.
It will be the moment when 200 years of defence policy are ripped up. A shift in Northern Europe so seismic it will almost have to be measured on the Richter scale. Since the end of the Napoleonic era, Sweden has maintained a policy of strict neutrality. In both World War I and World War II, Stockholm managed to keep itself apart from the bloodshed. Throughout the Cold War, the Swedes likewise remained independent of the.
But I gotta tell you once more, I think I said this before, managed to keep herself out from the First War and the Second War, Great War and World War II. I'm not saying I'm gonna be a warmonger here, but staying out of the Second World War was probably that's one thing that I felt that it was wrong. In many ways, Sweden, of course, helped the war effort by housing hunted Jews and supporting with uh, this and this and that to the war effort. But then again, we actually never really stopped um, trading with Germany, especially when it comes to the iron ore that Sweden was at that time very, very abundant of. There was a rumor. I can't really determine if it's correct or not, but it's a rumor that we let the German forces come from, I think it was from Finland, and we helped them out with trains to go and ambush the Norwegians, northern Norway. I'm not really sure if that's true, but that was a rumor that actually happened. So basically, what we did, we backstabbed our neighbor. So saying that kept out was basically not neutrality whatsoever.
The Great Two Blocs, wearing their non-aligned status as a badge of honour. Last year, though, That neutral stance finally evaporated. Following Vladimir Putin's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, Sweden's government applied alongside Finland to join NATO. At the time of recording, that application is still being held up by Hungary and Turkey, but most analysts believe Stockholm will eventually become NATO's 32nd member. And that raises a vital question. What will Sweden bring to the alliance? On paper, a country of 10.4 million peaceniks might not sound like a great addition. Yet while Sweden's standing army might be small, the military punches way above its weight. In domains as disparate as cyber, air, and naval capacity, Stockholm commands serious forces. Forces we're going to analyse in today's video.
I'm going to say this again before we actually watch the video. I'm sorry. There's going to be analysis from what he says. And again, I don't think when people actually voted, if actually people will allow to vote about NATO, I think the majority would say no, without a doubt. The people that wants us to join NATO, we are members of NATO now, really don't understand what it actually means. This is something that will become a very harsh dawning for the people understanding what it actually means. I like that. I like the
For anyone
wake-up
following
call.
European news, May the 18th, 2022 was a day that offered a lot of action. In Ukraine, hundreds of defenders of the Azovstal plant surrendered, bringing a close to one of the war's earliest major battles. Up in Kiev, the first Russian soldier to be tried for war crimes appeared before a local court. But it arguably wasn't on the battlefields of Ukraine that the biggest story was unfolding, but nearly 2,000 kilometers away in a wood-paneled room in Brussels. There, the ambassadors from Finland and Sweden jointly handed application letters to NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg. In doing so, they transformed the security architecture of Europe for decades to come. Prior to this moment, the two Nordic nations had been famous for their non-alignment. On our earlier video on Finland and NATO, we described how Helsinki had maintained neutrality for nearly 75 years. But what was a massive psychological shift for the Finns was on a whole other level for the Swedes. While Finland had been steadfastly neutral for over 7 decades, Sweden had clung to its non-aligned status for over 2 centuries. Beginning in the last years of the Napoleonic Wars, when Stockholm was forced to cede Finland to Russia after the Finnish War, that neutrality had survived some of the greatest conflagrations to sweep Europe. Even the continent-wide murder-suicide pact that was World War II managed to leave the Swedes relatively unscathed, and the Cold War was nothing if not a demonstration of how a non-aligned Sweden could happily prosper. The key question is, what changed? What about the present moment is so volatile that Stockholm feels more vulnerable than it ever did during the era of Blitzkrieg? And on the face of it, well, the answer seems pretty simple. Vladimir Putin's genocidal
The thing is, there has been a lot of talk about NATO for a very long time, even before Putin, his war efforts in Ukraine. I think the reason, I think the drop that made the cup full is definitely Putin. But we're talking about domestic terrorist attacks and stuff like that. So it's the big package. Definitely Putin was the last drop that made this decision come to life, definitely.
The war in Ukraine has overturned decades of defense planning in Europe, sending non-NATO countries racing for the shelter of the nuclear umbrella. But that's only the surface-level answer, the catalyst for this shift rather than the underlying cause. Unlike Finland, Sweden shares no land border with Russia. It has no significant Russian-speaking population that Vladimir Putin might want to protect. More to the point, Stockholm went the entire Cold War without feeling the need for a nuclear umbrella, comfortable in its ability to defend itself. And it's here that we get to the deeper level answer for Sweden wanting to abandon its neutrality, the steady erosion of the nation's defense capacity. The key to Sweden's non-aligned status was a policy variously known as deterrence through strength or heavily armed neutrality. Similar to what Taiwan's military planners now call the Porcupine Strategy, the idea was to make Sweden such a nightmare to conquer that even the Soviet Union would judge the costs to be vastly outweighing the benefits. Like Finland, that meant maintaining
Did he say Soviet Union? I really hope he doesn't talk in present day, because It's Russia now.
A conscription model that provided a highly trained reserve force that could be activated at a moment's notice. In Sweden's case, that force totaled 850,000 men. Like Finland, it also meant investing in weaponry far beyond what a nation of its size might normally wield. Unlike with Finland, though, Sweden's heavily armed neutrality didn't survive the biggest geopolitical shift of the last 35 years, the end of the Cold War. While Helsinki continued to maintain a vast reserve army, Stockholm allowed it to wither in the soft glow of peace. The defense budget was slashed, the funds redirected. The Navy and Air Force shrank by around 70%, the Army by a staggering 90%.
Yeah.
In no time at all, that 850,000 strong reserve force had dropped to a mere 10,000. By the mid-2010s, the military had seen such deep cuts that garrisons were being shuttered, even in regions vital to the nation's defense, like the island of Gotland. Conscription had been scrapped, military spending dropped to barely a single percentage point of GDP. All of this on the back of the idea that peace in Europe was here to stay. And of course, we all know what happened next. On February the 24th, 2022, Vladimir Putin unleashed his assault on Ukraine. As missiles pounded Kiev, it was like the lights had finally flicked back on.
He is extremely spot on when it comes to Sweden being completely oblivious to everything and kind-hearted, PC, thinking that, well, nothing bad's gonna happen. So let's just slash everything. Let's quit the conscription. Let's just slash that, do that, and focus on. And Sweden is in a country now that we have free medical here. Yes, we do have it, and it's wonderful, but it's not good. I mean, it's not good. It could be way better than it is. We spend money on the wrong things, to be honest. And joining NATO just means that the money that we're spending on bullcrap needs to be spent on the defenses. I'm not talking just about defenses. We're talking about attacks too. Because if NATO rings the war bell, Sweden got to answer that. And I don't think we're prepared for that. I don't think the mothers and fathers in Sweden are prepared for that.
Europe's post-Cold War party, and Sweden was among those nations sheepishly caught with its trousers down. As director of studies at the Swedish Defense Research Agency, Robert Dahlsjö bluntly told the New York Times, "We had our dream, and now it's time to wake up." Given all that, you might now be under the impression that Stockholm is going to be a drag on the alliance, that the Swedes are running for NATO protection because their modern military consists of two guys called Bjorn driving an armoured Volvo. But that impression couldn't be more wrong, because while Stockholm doubtless regrets its deep military cuts, that doesn't mean the Swedes have nothing to offer. What the Nordic Kingdom lacks in manpower, it more than makes up for with cutting-edge technology.
Okay.
Back when we did our Finland video, one of the
We're going to talk about the Archer.
very few problems we highlighted was Helsinki's lack of a solid defense industrial base. In a war of attrition, Finland would become quickly dependent on other NATO allies for resupply. In Sweden, the situation is more or less reversed. While its tiny standing army and reserve forces wouldn't even be a rounding error compared to what Helsinki can field, Stockholm has the capacity to produce both small arms and high-tech defensive kit. So much so that Sweden is both one of the world's leading arms exporters and one of the largest arms manufacturers per capita. But this kit isn't just built for foreign markets. In pretty much all domains, Stockholm is able to combine internationally purchased kit with homegrown weapons platforms to compete with the best. Let's start with the Swedish Navy. While relatively small compared to other coastal nations, Sweden fields a navy with an excellent reputation for stealth. Central to this is the domestically produced Gotland class of submarines, of which 5 are currently known to be in operation. A diesel-electric sub, the Gotland has been called, quote, one of the most advanced submarines in the world.
The funny thing about that one is that I'm pretty sure it was the Gotland class that managed to sneak in a war game a very long time ago, undetected, and it's actually diesel. It's not. That's the negative part of it. It's stealthy as hell, even though it's diesel.
It's also one of the few non-nuclear submarines capable of staying underwater for weeks at a time rather than days. Its biggest claim to fame comes from war games conducted with the USA in 2005. In a mock-up battle, one Gotland sub managed to score direct hits on the $6 billion aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan without ever being detected. This, despite the Americans fielding anti-submarine escorts and an entire carrier task force. The anecdote nicely demonstrates the stealth capacity of the Swedish Navy, a capacity that carries over into the Visby-class corvettes. Essentially, Sweden's warships, the 5 Visbys, are designed
The Corvette looks really weird, I gotta tell you, but I love it.
to remain hidden to enemy radar, undetectable at range, even as they pack some serious firepower, like the naval gun Bofors 57mm Mark III. These are locally designed and built machines armed mostly with weapons built by Swedish firms, principally Saab Bofors Dynamics. And yeah, that's the same Saab that used to be best known for building cars. Today they're apparently more focused on supplying NATO armies than ensuring a comfortable drive to IKEA. Still, this defense industrial base doesn't mean the Swedes don't also buy from partner countries. The army's main battle tank, for example, comes from Germany. Stockholm has something in the region of 120 Leopard 2A tanks. Air defense likewise relies on foreign tech. In 2021, Sweden...
There was actually a fight with, I think it was the Leopard, one of the American tanks, can't remember, M1. I'm sorry, I can't really remember which one it is. And there was 3 battle tanks. Sweden need to decide which of these 3, and Leopard actually won. So that's cool.
Became the first non-NATO nation to receive Patriot systems from the US. Yet, even in the domains where they're happy to rely on outside systems, the Swedes still produce their own powerful machines. Those 120 Leopard 2As, they're backed by something in the region of 500 CV-90 infantry fighting vehicles, among the best in their class in the entire world. It's stuff like this that demonstrates why Sweden's tiny army is not to be taken lightly. In the event of a shooting war between NATO and Russia, Stockholm's homegrown equipment, designed with the frigid climate of North Europe in mind, would be instrumental in securing the alliance's northern flank. This includes in the cyber domain. Unlike most Western countries, Sweden has been actively pursuing offensive cyber capabilities for years. As the Atlantic Council wrote in 2022, if recent exercises are any indicator, Swedish cyber capabilities are already among the most advanced in Europe. Really though, it's not for Sweden's cyber efforts that NATO is desperate to get Stockholm in the door, nor is it for what the army or navy feels, impressive as their kit is. No, there is one single domain where the Swedes really shine. One area where their expertise and equipment could make a crucial difference in any Europe-wide conflagration. We're talking, of course, about the Swedish Air Force.
Master of the Sky. Yas. I heard. I made a reaction video for a very long time about one of the American air fighters, and one wrote to me that the Yas, it's a brute in the air. I love that.
Anyone watching CNN last May might have been surprised when a segment aired calling Sweden one of the world's top-ranked air forces. After all, this is a country with only 10.4 million citizens, a nation with a GDP on par with Ireland. This is on a continent that boasts the British RAF, the French Air Force, and Italy's sizable Aeronautica Militaire. So the idea that tiny Sweden can compete in the air should be laughable. It should be, but it isn't, because CNN wasn't just indulging in cable news hyperbole. Stockholm really does possess an air force that could put many of its peers to shame. The main reason for this is the nation's homemade fighter jet, the Gripen JAS-39. Designed when the Cold War was still ongoing, Gripens had to work to a very specific set of requirements. They had to be cheap, since Sweden couldn't pour the sort of resources into its combat craft that America or NATO could. They had to be easy to operate and reliable, less flashy than stuff like the F-16, but also requiring less maintenance. Finally, they had to be capable of short takeoffs and landings, since Swedish defense plans called for following dispersed operations doctrine in the event of war. In practical terms, that meant pilots had to be able to fly sorties from remote roads in the Swedish wilderness where an invading force would be hard-pressed to find and destroy them. The result was a machine that Aviacy Online describes as a small but competent fighter, a robust, cost-effective weapons platform capable of doing serious damage. Those capabilities have only improved since the Cold War ended. Today, one-seat Gripen C varieties are equipped with MBDA Meteor long-range air-to-air missiles and a cutting-edge active electronically scanned array system. The most modern E-variety Gripens are even capable of supercruise flight, placing them in a rare group alongside craft like the F-22 Raptor, the Eurofighter Typhoon, or France's Dassault Rafale. In short, these are craft that compete at an international level, so much so that heavy-hitter nations like Brazil rely on them to protect air power. Currently, Sweden has nearly 100 of them, 75 C variants, 22 C to D variants, and just 2 of the ultramodern E variants, though some 58 more E-craft are scheduled to be delivered in the near future. All C and D aircraft are also planned to undergo upgrades that will keep them working and relevant through to 2035, when the whole fleet will be replaced with newer models. So, yeah. There's good reason people seriously into combat aircraft have a secret soft spot for Sweden's Air Force. But combat crafts aren't the only things a modern air power needs. They're also the less sexy, but still vital functions like airborne early warning and control craft and intelligence gathering vessels. And well, Sweden shines here too. As Defense News recently reported, Stockholm is set to buy 2 of Saab's new GlobalEye AW&C craft. According to the manufacturer, GlobalEye, quote, combine air, maritime and ground surveillance on a single platform, all in real time. To that, you can also add 2 Gulfstream 4 aircraft modified for intelligence gathering. Now, we don't want to turn this entire chapter into a geeky loving for Sweden's Air Force, or for you to leave with the impression that Stockholm could project air power on a similar level to a nation like the USA. It's absolutely not the case. Even Sweden's own generals wouldn't try to claim that. Their Air Force, for example, has a clear and noticeable weakness where large transport craft are concerned, fielding only 5 C-130H.
The problem with the Swedish Hercules is that they're fucking old. They're damn old.
Hercules. It's hardly anything for NATO to get excited about. But what we're trying to do is paint a clear picture of a nation that consistently punches several classes above it.
None of the Hercules that we have has any guns on it. It's just pure transport.
Its weight in the air domain. A country that won't be a drag on NATO, but a worthy addition to its northern flank. Not that the alliance would be in much of a position to reject Sweden, even if its military offered nothing more than flat pack furniture and ABBA tribute bands. And that's because Sweden, the nation, represents something NATO can't afford to ignore. Something that has nothing to do with technology or defense industrial bases. And that's a way to project NATO power in 2 vital bodies of water. One of Vladimir Putin's stated reasons for unleashing his war on Ukraine was to halt the further expansion of NATO. As many have noted, his actions ironically had the exact opposite effect. When Finland joined the alliance on April 4th, 2023, it more than doubled the land border that Russia shares with NATO. But even that strategic blunder may pale compared to Sweden joining. Or if, or when, Stockholm is finally admitted to the alliance, it will transform the Baltic Sea from a region bordered by members and non-members alike into little more than a NATO lake. If you look at a map of the alliance from before the Ukraine war, you'll see an obvious weak point: the mere 65-kilometer strip of land connecting the Baltic states with the rest of the alliance. As we covered in our earlier video, Finland's accession eliminated that problem, creating a straightforward way to resupply Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania via sea. Sweden's accession, though, will go one step further. Rather than eliminate the problem, it'll flip it around, creating a world in which the Baltic Sea suddenly becomes Moscow's obvious weak point. If you look at that map again, with Sweden and Finland both in NATO, we can see that Russia only has a couple of tiny strips from which it can access the Baltic Sea. 2 strategic choke points that the alliance could potentially blockade. The first is in the Gulf of Finland, the strip of water separating Finland and Estonia. A blockade here would not only cut off St. Petersburg from the sea, it would also trap the Russian Baltic fleet in port at Kronstadt. The second is the water around Kaliningrad, a Russian exclave bordering Poland and Lithuania. Just 200 kilometers from Sweden, it houses one of Russia's only ice-free ports, as well as a serious military base. But given any ships trying to exit will have to pass through both Denmark and Sweden, its use would evaporate in wartime, especially when you take into account Sweden's nearby island of Gotland. A strip of land a hair under 3,000 square kilometers, Gotland has been called an unsinkable aircraft carrier, a place from where a military could dominate maritime and air traffic over the Baltic Sea. As such,
Gotland is definitely, to me, the military strategy. Gotland needs to have a frick ton of defenses. because that is the best place for the enemy to embark and use as forward operating base, air base, whatever you want. Without a doubt, that needs to be heavily defended at all times.
It's long been a premier Russian target. Back in the Cold War, Swedish spies uncovered Soviet plans to occupy the island in the event of war, Sweden's neutrality be damned. Closer to our time, Gotland was the subject of a jingoistic Russian documentary broadcast on the eve of the Ukraine war, one which described how Moscow could capture it alongside Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia. For this reason, Stockholm long kept a mighty military presence there. During the Cold War, 25,000 troops guarded the place, with another 25,000 in reserve. Harbours were filled with mines, 25 fixed artillery pieces and 36 tanks were ready and waiting for a potential battle. But the peacetime cuts destroyed all of that. Today, Gotland is protected by only 300 to 400 soldiers. The coastal defences have been dismantled. The submarine base, incredibly, was almost sold to a Russian businessman. Although Sweden is rapidly trying to remilitarize the island, it's currently a weak link, a place Russia's forces at Kaliningrad would almost certainly try to seize in the opening hours of a full-blown conflict. If Sweden joins NATO, though, Gotland could go from being a potential problem to a potential lifesaver, a place the alliance's forces could fortify and use to dominate the entire Baltic Sea. With fellow NATO member Turkey also capable of closing the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits, Russia could quickly find most of its European ports cut off from the wider world. Most, but not all of them. Up in the far north, ports like Murmansk would still have access to the Atlantic via the Arctic Ocean. And that brings us neatly to another reason why NATO wants Sweden on side. Admit the Swedes to the club, and every Arctic nation not called Russia will be an alliance member. There are 8 Arctic nations in the world: Canada, the USA, Denmark via Greenland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. Of these, Russia controls the majority of the Arctic coastline, slightly over 50%. It has also invested heavily in military infrastructure in the region. As the planet warms and Arctic ice begins to recede, the region is only going to become more important.
We're talking about Gotland. I'm pretty sure we don't have any. I think we have around 400 to 800 soldiers. And that's not enough. We use Gotland for a lot of on-sea, off-sea embarkment training, but we need to have Gotland extremely protected, because he's saying it. So why is Gotland such an important point? It's just perfect spot. It's the perfect spot. You can attack by land, by air, by sea, from Gotland, all across northern Atlantic. You get all of them. And that's going to make me nervous.
Important to shipping. At the same time, energy and mineral resources are going to become available to exploit. That means the chance of confrontation in these waters will increase. As the Council on Foreign Relations has put it, having 7 of 8 border nations in NATO, quote, allows the alliance to pursue a more coherent strategy in the region. This is potentially vital for both European and American interests, not just because of Russia, but because of another nation that's expanding operations there. China has plans to create a so-called Polar Silk Road using the Northern Sea Route, massively increasing Beijing's influence and power in what's becoming a highly contested region. For US lawmakers looking to try and contain China, a NATO-dominated Arctic is one of the few ways of countering the CCP's northern plans. At this stage, though, we're still just looking at ways Swedish membership could potentially benefit NATO, and interesting as this is, there's a whole other aspect we really do need to consider. And that's just how compatible are Stockholm and NATO going to be. Although they cooperated...
I'm going to say this. It's going into partners. I'm going to say this. Whatever happens, the Nordic countries will always help each other out, no matter what. Without a doubt. I would get really pissed off if Sweden or Finland or Denmark, Norway, even Iceland didn't come for our aid, and if we didn't come for theirs. There's not going to be an issue with that. I understand that most Americans are fed up with being the only nations that respond to someone's yell for help. NATO needs to have, I think there is a way to say, if we call you, you better answer.
Closely as non-aligned countries, the ambivalence felt towards NATO in Stockholm and Helsinki was not identical. The Finns had living memories of Russian aggression in the form of the Winter War fought between their nation and the Soviet Union in World War II. So when Putin's Russia finally showed its true colours, Finland was almost immediately ready to throw its lot in with NATO. By March 2022, polling showed that over 60% of Finns wanted to be part of the alliance, a number that eventually rose to over 80%. In Sweden, though, things weren't quite so clear-cut. With no Russian land border and no personal memories of Russian aggression, Stockholm was ambivalent about ending its neutrality. As late as mid-March, Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson was saying she saw no need to apply to NATO. The public, too, were unsure. Even in April 2022, polls were showing fewer than half of all Swedes supported entering the alliance. To put that in perspective, this was after the discovery of Russian war crimes at Bucha, when the world already knew of the arbitrary torture, sexual assault, and murder Moscow's forces had visited upon civilians. For some, this reluctance to follow the Finns was ascribed to Swedish psychology, the idea that Swedes see themselves as natural peacemakers and a force for dialogue on the world stage. But this assessment skipped over one key point in the Sweden-NATO debate. The Swedish military had already been cooperating with the alliance for decades. The partnership between the two forces began almost immediately after the end of the Cold War, with the first steps being taken in 1992. By 1994, Sweden was an official member of the NATO Partnership for Peace program. Not long after, the two began conducting joint military exercises. In many ways, this step was practical.
There is a lot. You can go back early 90s. Sweden has never been a part of NATO and had never felt the need to be, because basically we always had a bunch of friends. We have been shaking hands with the big countries for a very long time, like this. Hey, yeah, we can hang. There's some thousands and thousands of videos out there how Sweden conducting peace making exercise with NATO. But now I'm super happy that we joined, and I know that so many people are against calling NATO a war band. Is it though?
In 1995, both Sweden and Finland joined the EU, a move that included signing a mutual defence clause. With many EU members already in NATO, working with the alliance would clearly be necessary in any continent-wide war. Yet Sweden's cooperation with NATO would go deeper than what was strictly necessary. As we mentioned earlier, Stockholm received equipment from the alliance, becoming the first non-member to host a Patriot system. Not only that, but it also joined NATO on active missions. The NATO force in Kosovo, KFOR, has included Swedish troops, as have NATO forces in Afghanistan and Iraq. During the 2011 intervention in Libya, Sweden's Air Force was involved in enforcing the no-fly zone. According to the Dutch magazine Militaire Spectator, during the mission, quote, Swedish aircraft seamlessly integrated with NATO air forces. In other words, Sweden isn't some outside force coming into NATO, not knowing the difference between Article 5 and a piece of pickled herring.
The pickled herring. We have been the baby brother. Can we join you now? No. How about now? Fine.
It's rather a nation that has spent decades now hovering on the threshold of membership without ever quite stepping through the door. That doesn't mean there won't be issues when or if Stockholm is allowed in the club. Just to take one example, NATO countries commit to spending a minimum of 2% of GDP on defence. While only 7 of the 31 members actually hit that target, most are at least spending over 1.5%. Sweden, on the other hand, spent a mere 1.2% in 2022. Within the alliance, that would make it one of the lowest spending members, ahead of only Luxembourg, Spain, and Belgium. And while there are plans to boost spending by billions of dollars, it will take at minimum until 2028 for Sweden to come close to the 2% target. Despite all of this, though, it seems today that Sweden may finally be ready to step over that membership threshold to become NATO's 32nd member. Back in May of 2022, polling reported a majority of Swedes wanted to join the alliance for the first time in history. Since then, that number has only grown, not to the sky-high levels that have been seen in Finland, but to a solid 60%. which is a
Oh
solid
shit,
majority
really?
by any stretch. The new government under Ulf Kristersson has followed this shift. On March the 23rd, 2023, the Riksdagen voted to join NATO. 296 lawmakers were in favour, only 37 were against. But this doesn't mean it's a done deal. At the time of recording, alliance members Turkey and Hungary are both withholding approval of Sweden's accession, a major deal since joining.
The reason why Turkey, Hungary just sat on it was just a power hungry asshole tactics. Nothing else. Bullcrap. When they accepted, done. Sweden is done. It's 2024. May. We're in.
Joining NATO requires unanimity. It could even be that this approval never comes, and Stockholm is left eternally out in the cold, no longer neutral by choice, but forced by politics in Ankara and Budapest to remain non-aligned. But this seems unlikely. Right now, the smart money is on Turkey and Hungary eventually dropping their objections. When they do, NATO will at last admit its 32nd member, a member that has a lot to give. Now, as we've hopefully shown in today's video, Sweden's membership isn't a magic bullet for the alliance, nor is it the equivalent to inviting in a major power on the scale of the US or even France. What it is, though, is a win for NATO on multiple fronts, a much-needed boost from a military that may be small, but plays to its strengths with deadly precision. A military that can help ensure safety and security in Europe for generations to come.
Yeah, that was a pretty good analysis. The only thing I can say as a Swede that we have way more to do. We need to put the cash in the not only in the defense, because we have done that. We need to put more cash into what would happen if NATO calls. I know that we're gonna send a bunch of troops down to, I think it was Estonia, to actually be placed there as deterrence for the Russian offense. So that's one thing that's gonna happen. Uh, Today I'm not really sure if they had been sent to it already, so I'm gonna leave that behind. But overall, I gotta tell you, I am I'm kind of happy with the analysis, and the C-130s that we have is like from the 60s. Bet your bottom dollar butthole that they haven't even considered buying the new ones. I used to be in the Air Force, and those old bags, they still run. Don't worry about it. They still do what they're supposed to do. Don't worry about it. They are good transport. However, they are old as crap. Well, I'm going to leave it at that. Old as crap. There you go. Famous last words. If you did enjoy this, don't forget to smack the like and, of course, hit that subscribe. I greatly appreciate that. And if you didn't get anything out of this, let me know. What do you think? Sweden? NATO? Well, yeah. Let me know. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Recky. You stay safe.